For the next week, I am going to use the Galaxy Watch 5 Pro, the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic, and the Galaxy Watch Ultra, but not in the way that you think. I am going to run each of them until they run out of battery and then compare how they were to use. Let's go. So it's been just over a week. I actually tried to test each watch twice instead of just once. I wanted to give the battery a chance to optimize itself and sort of learn usage patterns. One, so it could correctly predict my usage behavior. And then two, it could then actually optimize performance to suit that usage. Let's see how they did. Oh my God, I just caught myself on the source monitor, and this sunglass tan, that's a direct result of being a coach at a football carnival. Whew. Let's see my watch tan. I'll show you later. So I'll just kick it off with design. And I sort of went through these watches individually. I started way back with the Galaxy Watch 5 Pro, then used the Classic, then used the Ultra. And in each category, that's sort of the progression that will go. The Watch 5 Pro is nothing really to write home about as far as design goes. It's very understated. There's not a lot to it. Samsung didn't really make it sort of big or flashy. It's just a smartwatch that is doing its job from a design point of view. It's very thick. It raises up considerably above your wrist. You definitely can feel it on, and you can see it on, especially when from that side sort of angle. There's no unique elements about it. It's just a watch and it looks as is. It was very much by design from Samsung. It introduced new materials. It was the first smartwatch that Samsung used with titanium as the case to increase that durability, but also keep the weight down at the same time. It also has a bigger battery. So that thicker design housed a 590 milliamp hour battery, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. The display though is considerably smaller than the other two watches that I also tried alongside it. We'll talk about display in a moment. Up next was the Classic. The Classic is, well, classic. It's got a really sort of watch style design. It's very classy. It's very sophisticated. The black color that I've got as well looks incredibly nice on the wrist. It's very, very sort of classy and formal. I'll use the word classy quite a bit. I really like how it looks when you want to dress up. So I was lucky enough in between this test to go to a wedding, and I got to wear this watch alongside my suit. And it just looked really nice sitting on my wrist alongside formal clothing. What I really like too is how comfortable it is to wear. It's got a really nice weight about it. It's not heavy, but it's not too light. But it also just feels so comfortable on your wrist. I really liked and appreciated how it felt in the time that I wore it. And it's the only watch of the three that has the rotating bezel. When we talk about performance later, we'll touch on it a bit more, but it's just such a nice way of navigating around. And that kind of adds into the design because it's so well blended in, but then you just rotate it and it feels really nice to use. Next up was the Ultra, the last one in the test. The thing I noticed when I put it back on is it's a statement. I also immediately felt back at home. I did wear the Ultra for 2 weeks before I started this test, and I thoroughly enjoyed how it looked and how it felt. There's some things that Samsung have done to increase its comfort and also make it look and feel really nice on. It's definitely not subtle. It feels and looks as ultra as the name suggests. I definitely prefer this style and aesthetic compared to the 5 Pro. For example, there was not much really going on with the 5 Pro, and it was thick from bottom to top. What Samsung have done here with the Ultra is they've spread all the components out over a larger surface area. It's got a bigger display, and the bigger casing means that they can kind of spread the components out and sort of move that space around instead of just making it big from bottom to top. Part of the comfort feel is how Samsung have made the sensors on the back flatter and sort of have better contact with the skin. So it doesn't sort of feel like you've got gaps everywhere. It feels like it's part of your wrist as opposed to just on your wrist. It does have a digital touch bezel, which it shares in common with the 5 Pro. However, it is far more responsive and easier to use than the 5 Pro's touch bezel. But I'll talk about that a little bit later on. It also improved on the durability compared to the other two watches. You've got 10 ATM here versus 5. So you can go 100 meters instead of 50 when you're deep sea diving, which whatever, I'm never going to do. So ultimately, the three of them are more than capable of catering for what I need, which is splashing around at the beach and going for a swim at the pool. You've also got a titanium casing here, which is the same as the 5 Pro. That also had titanium, but the 6 Classic had the aluminium. The other thing I want to point out here is these designs all sort of take a different approach to charging. I thought I'd point it out here because it's more of a design thing than it is a performance thing. The 5 Pro, the band that it comes with was quite frustrating. It wouldn't sit flush on the wireless charger trio that I've got. And I did hack a way to do it. You've got to bend back the bands and put it in this really unnatural, awkward position. And then it will sit on the wireless charging trio pad that I've got. The Classic's no problem. Just easily chuck that down on the wireless charging pad because one, the band is just sort of flush and it just has a really nice contact area. But the Ultra has some problems. It's a similar issue with the band, except this band you can't just bend backwards. What I found is I basically have to take the bands off so I can charge it on the wireless charging trio. Or I have to use the other charger that's somewhere else in the house, not conveniently located next to my bed. And that's just the charger that came in the box. So there's some issues there with the charging, not just the fact it doesn't have power share, which I did use with the Watch 6 Classic. It came in a lot of handy when I was at the gym one day and just needed a quick boost. I added 3 or 4% whilst I was getting ready when the watch was charging on the back of my Fold 6. So this not having power share and also not conveniently charging on the charger trio that's next to my bed or duo, which I've now got, is an issue. That's a design problem for me. Whilst we're talking about the bands and the issues with different bands, the Watch 5 Pro had probably the most great but frustrating bands that I've ever seen. It was really easy to take on and off. The clasp mechanism was just so simple and it meant that it could easily be stored away as well when I wasn't wearing it. But alongside the charging issue that I was having, or I had to bend the band back, it's also really hard to adjust. Trying to dig up the little clasp to feed the band through either hurt my finger somewhat considerably, or you needed to grab an extra accessory to do. The Classic with its leather band was just a standard leather band. It was super easy to just change and adjust the size and easy enough to take off. And it was comfortable. I like how Samsung had the rubber on the inside and the leather on the outside, so it's more comfortable on the wrist and no irritation occurred. Both of those bands are also 20mm pin connectors. So Samsung make it easy to just grab any generic watch band that you can, and I really liked that. The Ultra has completely revamped the system of the band. They no longer do the pins. It's now just a push and release system, and it just clicks back into place. It does make it easier to change, but it's now a bit harder to find. A friend of the channel, Strapify, have actually given you a discount to Galaxy Watch Ultra bands. Use the code TWB at the link in the description and you get 20% off any watch band for Galaxy Watch Ultra of your choosing. And that makes it a lot easier to sort of grab a band that you can swap out. But to start with, you no longer can go and get just any band anymore. You're stuck with the one here. The other thing I noticed too is the band that comes with the white one that I've got sort of leaves little imprints in your wrist, which isn't a problem when you're wearing it. It's just when you take it off, you see it, and now you've seen my Watch 10. The displays here on all these watches have another element as well. The Watch 5 Pro and the Watch 6 Classic are good, but I've noticed in my time using them outdoors, the Watch Ultra, actually the best display by far. With a peak brightness of 3000 nits, when you go outside, there is absolutely no way you're not seeing this. It's so much more comfortable to view and experience this outdoors, and there's no missing it, especially as how big the screen is as well. So design-wise, it might not have sounded like it, but I really like the Classic. It just looks and feels premium, and you're not wearing a piece of technology on your wrist. You're more or less wearing a watch that then functions like a smartwatch. Whereas the other ones are very much making statements. So for me, the Classic is like the perfect smartwatch design because it doesn't look like a smartwatch. Let me know which one you like the best in the comments below. Curious to know which design you prefer. Software time and health functions. I think there's a lot of varying differences here, at least on the surface level. But maybe when you go a bit deeper, it might not be as different as you think. I want to say I used a control, sort of especially for the health tracking. On my right wrist, I wore the Galaxy Watch 7, the 40mm, because that's got all of the new sensors and technology that the Watch Ultra has. So it kind of gave me a good barometer over the advancements and the differences between the Pro and the Classic to what the Ultra can do as well. So let's start with the Pro. The Pro, I noticed a couple of things. At first, it was quite consistent. I took it on the treadmill at the gym, and I noticed the consistency with the steps it was tracking and the heart rate and the calories. It was all sort of in line, but then there was a huge discrepancy when I took it to do weights training, my circuit training workout. The heart rate and the calories just started being wildly inconsistent. there was a good 20 to 30 beats per minute variance during the workout with the Watch 5 Pro and the Watch 7. Kind of crazy. I'm not sure why that was, but considering the Watch 7 is meant to be the newer, more accurate sensors, I kind of back what that was telling me versus what the Pro was saying. I tracked my sleep with the Watch 5 Pro, but I forgot to wear the Watch 7 alongside it. I might do it before uploading the video, and I'll just insert it now. So I've just woken up. It's 6:59 in the morning, and I did it. I wore them both to bed. The thing I noticed is that the sleep scores were identical. The sleep times were the same, so it was going to sleep and how long I was asleep for. The sleep stages were vastly different. You can see in these two graphs side by side that the 5 Pro said I was awake for a lot longer, whereas the Watch 7 said I was awake for a lot less. I did it. If it was there, you got to hit subscribe. Software-wise, it's oneui watch using Android Wear over the top of it. There's nothing really out of the ordinary. Samsung did introduce some really good software functions when it came out, but it's nothing that the other watches that exist now can't do. So it's not anything above and beyond what exists now as well. All the same things are there. I don't want to focus on everything it can do because it can do a lot. I do plan on a Samsung Health video one day, so let me know if that's something you'd want to see. The Watch 6 Classic, very similar to the Pro. It's got the same sort of sensors on board. Samsung probably tweaked the algorithms when they brought it out, but I'm pretty sure with the software updates, they're pretty much in line with each other now. I wore this for a circuit training and for a spin class. For the spin class, there were some discrepancies, but not anything too wild. Just some differences in the heart rate zones. There was about 6 calories of difference between the two outputs. And like I said, the heart rate zones were a bit different as well. And I think that's, obviously you want it to be as accurate as possible, but it's a pretty good guide for showing you how much you worked out and your exertion that you input, your output. So especially because the Classic is more trying to be sort of a convenience watch versus just a pure fitness watch. I think as long as it sort of gives you a good guide and you don't take it as gospel and you just use it as motivation and sort of tracking, I think it's okay. What I did notice between the two was how different the sleep tracking was. The sleep scores were different by about 10 points, and the sleep stages as well, the tracking of them was very, very different. So again, if we're to take the Watch 7, then yes, there is some differences there in the sleep tracking between these two watches. As far as software goes, the big advantage this has is how you navigate. You've got the rotating bezel, which gives you a really easy way to just quickly whip through a settings menu, quickly go to the next tile. It's very convenient, and it's still my favorite way of interacting with a smartwatch, period. Now it's on to the Ultra. It should be the most accurate of the lot, considering it's got all of the new sensors, it's got all of the new stuff to do with the dual band GPS, all that stuff's in here and brand new. I didn't compare it to the Watch 7 as they have the same sensors, so there's no real need for me to have a control when theoretically they're the same. The Ultra, at least compared with the other workouts that I did, output some really similar numbers. The more advanced sensors probably are more accurate in terms of things like heart rate zones, but in terms of tracking, you're still likely to get a very similar sort of guide and metrics that you want to see. What I want to focus on here is the extra information that this new watch gives you. Samsung have upped the game when it comes to sleep tracking with the Watch Ultra. You've got movement data, and it kind of gives it to you in a chart of like your movement through the night, and you can kind of align that with your awake periods and your sleep stages to see how much movement you've got during different stages. It's also got things like your respiratory rate. The respiratory rate can give you sort of important insights into your recovery and your sleep. So it's not just about the stages, there's extra stuff that are now surrounding it as well. Tied into that, Samsung have introduced the energy score. The energy score takes all of your activity and your sleep from the day before and puts it into a score. It's almost like a battery percentage, like you're waking up with a score of 60, 70% charged, ready to go for the day. When you go into this report of the score, it sort of has different sort of factors that sort of make up that score, and you can see what goes into it, and then it also tells you what you might need to improve on and gives you recommendations on areas you might want to focus on for the day ahead. Things like more activity, things like maybe going to bed earlier. It really tries to sort of drill down on certain factors so you can try and up that score and then noticeably feel better. There's other additions too, which I haven't used yet. They've got lots of multi-sport tracking, so things for triathlons, for example, or you can create your own, which is pretty neat. So if you're someone who links different workouts together, you can jump in and create that as a multi-sport workout and you do each one and then move on to the next one. It's pretty clever. Overall, the Watch Ultra has some nice upgrades when it comes to the health tracking. And I definitely appreciate that those extra insights that things like the energy score give you over what the Classic and the Pro does. I definitely prefer, from a health tracking point of view, the Ultra. Software-wise, Samsung have introduced the Quick button, and Samsung have allowed you to assign it to a lot of different things. I personally assign it to the water lock, especially when your fingers are wet. The touch on a touchscreen can get really finicky, so it's hard to activate water lock manually. So just pressing the button and turning water lock on, brilliant. It means that if I forget before I step into the shower or into the pool, I just press the button and it activates it. Good. Okay, performance and battery. The Watch 5 Pro was an interesting one because performance-wise, it was probably the worst performing Samsung smartwatch I've ever owned in terms of software interaction and fluidity. Awful. Awful is maybe a strong word. It just had some stutters about it that made it a really difficult experience. Because I haven't used it for a year, it had a lot of updates waiting for me. So I installed them and then ran it for a couple of days before I officially started the test. And whilst the updates helped a little bit, I still didn't notice any major improvements to the way you sort of can interact with it. The digital touch bezel, the way I remember it, was finicky and stuttery, and that hasn't changed. It's a hit and miss about the area of where you press it down or sort of rotate through it, and it just doesn't give you that nice vibration feedback that you kind of hope for. Contrary to that though, the battery life was incredible. When I first used it, it was easily a 4-day smartwatch. First day, second day, third day, halfway through the fourth day, chucking it on the charger, ready to go for another 4 days. Loved that about it, because especially coming from the Watch 4 Classic before it, which didn't have stellar battery life, it was a really welcome change. And even though I've worn it for 12 months straight and then haven't used it for 12 months, the battery life has still been really good. I sort of was monitoring it as I was using it. After about 24 hours, it sort of got down to 63%, which is okay. And really only after a week of using it sort of on and off, it was good that it still sort of learned my usage patterns pretty quickly. Ended up conking out just shy of 3 days of usage, which I was very pleased with, especially I've been using the Classic and the Ultra pretty much exclusively for the last 12 months. It was nice to get that extra bit of battery life out of a smartwatch. The other thing for me is it should be easier to charge. That's another point I've already made. The Watch 6 Classic is definitely better performing from a fluidity standpoint. Just has this really weird bug, at least it does for me. And I factory reset it too, and it still seems to be doing this. Whenever I rotate the watch from like a standing start, for some reason, no matter which way I rotate it, it goes to the last tile in my set. So even if I'm rotating it to the notifications, it just rotates to the tile at the other end of the watch. And it's just really odd. And I don't know why it's doing it, but it just does it. I thought I'd highlight it. I haven't got oneui 6 yet for the watch. I think the beta is still running overseas. So hopefully that might improve performance, maybe iron out some of the bugs like that. What I really like from a performance level is when you're in water lock mode, you can actually still interact with the watch. Because you've got the rotating bezel, let's say you get a notification, you can quickly rotate over to the left and see what it was. Whereas with these other watches in water lock mode, even the touch bezel's not operational. So I appreciate that about the Classic. Big problem I have with the Classic, and I shouldn't say big problem, because ultimately this is a smartwatch that's aiming to be convenience and lifestyle focused versus sort of fitness and long lasting, is that the battery life wasn't great. Even over the 12 months I wore it, it was ever really only giving me maximum 2 days, 48 hours. But in this test that I ran through twice, both times it was about 36 hours. You can get a little more out of it if you're not using it for like location tracking and exercise, or you get a little bit less if you are. So it's on average about 36, which is okay. It's nothing special. It's like a day and a half. You're charging it every other day. And that takes us to the Ultra. From a performance standpoint, it's both the smoothest and fastest and most fluid operating system and usage that Samsung have ever done on a smartwatch. Everything you do on it is so quick and rapid and just really nice to use. There's a really nice intuitive feel about it. There's no stutter, there's no weird bugs. It's just perfectly flying through the operating system no matter how you use it. Whether that be just the touchscreen or whether it be the very easy to use digital rotating bezel that has a very, very nice haptic feedback about it. It's pleasurable to use. It just has a big problem, battery life. I have got a software update which has fixed it a little bit, but it just went dead literally seconds before I turned on to film this video, and it ended up getting probably about 40 hours. It does have this nice thing about it though, that when you do run out of battery, it can just display the time. So if you're out somewhere and you're relying on your watch for the time, it still has enough juice left in it so it can show you the time on your screen. Black screen, white numbers, that's about it. The maximum I think I could ever get out of this watch is about 48 hours, which on a watch that's billed as Ultra, I just don't think that's enough. It has the same size battery as the Watch 5 Pro, but with a much bigger screen, which I think definitely impacts the battery life. And it also has a better, more powerful processor, which again, I think is impacting the battery longevity, whereas the 5 Pro wasn't pushing a lot of pixels and it didn't have the same performance, so the battery could extend out. You can do lots of like funky sort of power saving modes, but for an Ultra watch, I don't want to do any of that. I just want it to be performing all the time, and that's where it's at. It's pretty much on par with the Classic, which I did get used to, but I think the expectations were higher because it's the name Ultra, not Classic. What I kind of want is Samsung to make a combination of these three watches mashed together. I feel like the Ultra is close to that. It just doesn't have the battery life from the Pro to bring with it. It's probably unnecessary to do that. Not everyone wants everything. Some people only want certain parts of a smartwatch. And I think the Classic probably gives them the best of that because it gives them some of the health tracking and it gives them the convenience in a really sleek, intuitive package. The Ultra is for someone who wants that extra step, especially when it comes to how it looks and also some of the extra technology that's gone into it. If you're looking for a smartwatch that lasts longer within Samsung's range, the Pro is your bet. See if you can pick up one new, because the battery when new will last ages. Let me know what you guys think, which one you'd pick up if all three were available. I think the Classic and the Ultra definitely, but the Pro might be a bit harder to get. Hit subscribe, take what benefits. I'll see you in the next one. You. Can't leave this here.